Capricorn, Capricorn. If you say this, Capricorn will never reply again. There are words that end conversations with Capricorn permanently. Not arguments, not accusations. Just specific phrases that flip a switch inside them so completely that you'll never get a meaningful response again. And here's what makes this particularly devastating. You probably said it thinking you were being honest, vulnerable, or even loving. You had no idea you were activating their deepest defense mechanism. This isn't about Capricorn being sensitive or dramatic. It's about something far more primal, a psychological tripwire that's been set since childhood, waiting to be activated. When you say this particular thing, you're not just having a conversation anymore. You're confirming their worst fear about human connection, and their nervous system responds with complete shutdown. Most astrology content tells you that Capricorns are patient, loyal, and slow to give up on relationships. That's true until it isn't. Until you cross a line you didn't even know existed. Until you say something that sounds reasonable to everyone else, but translates to Capricorn as fundamental incompatibility. Almost nobody talks about this specific trigger because it doesn't fit the narrative we have about this sign. We see them as stoic and resilient. We don't see what happens when that resilience calcifies into permanent disconnection. If you're a Capricorn, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There have been conversations where someone said something and you felt a door slam shut inside you. Not gradually. Instantly. One moment you were engaged, the next moment you were done. Not angry, not hurt in a way that could be repaired, just completely finished. If you love a Capricorn, you've probably experienced the confusion of them suddenly becoming unreachable, wondering what you possibly could have said that was so unforgivable. Before we explore this psychological architecture, I need you to do something important. Hit that subscribe button right now. This channel maps the hidden patterns beneath zodiac signs, the psychological truth that surface-level astrology never touches. And smash that like button if you've ever felt yourself completely shut down in a conversation and knew, with absolute certainty, that you were done engaging. Here's my question for you, and I want you to sit with this. Have you ever heard someone say something that immediately changed how you saw them forever? Not because it was cruel, but because it revealed a fundamental incompatibility you couldn't unsee? Have you ever felt yourself exit a relationship emotionally in real time while the other person had no idea what just happened? Drop a comment and tell me. Have you experienced this moment of irreversible knowing? Because what we're about to unpack isn't just about words. It's about what those words reveal. It's about the moment when Capricorn realizes that the person in front of them will never understand their internal world. When they recognize that explaining would require more vulnerability than the relationship could possibly be worth. When they choose silence not as punishment, but as protection from the exhaustion of being fundamentally misunderstood. Stay with me. This might explain years of confusion in one conversation. Let me introduce you to the central architecture of Capricorn psyche that makes this pattern possible. The belief that respect is more important than love. Not consciously, not as an articulated philosophy, but as a deep foundational operating system installed in early childhood and reinforced through decades of lived experience. Picture a child who grew up in an environment where love was conditional on achievement, where affection was scarce but approval for accomplishment was available, where being useful earned you a place at the table, but being needy got you dismissed or ignored. The Capricorn child learns something crucial. Emotional connection is unreliable, but respect is something you can earn and control through competence, discipline, and self-sufficiency. This creates a hierarchy in their psyche where being respected matters more than being loved, because respect feels more stable, more deserved, more within their control. Love can be withdrawn arbitrarily. People can stop loving you for reasons you can't predict or prevent. But respect, if you work hard enough, achieve enough, demonstrate enough value. Respect feels like something you can maintain through sheer effort. So Capricorn builds their entire identity around being respectable, being someone worthy of admiration, being competent, reliable, accomplished, put together. They become the person others look up to, depend on, trust to handle difficult situations. And this works beautifully for a long time. It creates a sense of security that emotional vulnerability never could. It gives them a clear path. Be valuable, be competent, be admirable, and you'll have a place in the world. But here's where the first fracture appears. Respect without intimacy is profoundly lonely. You can be surrounded by people who admire you while feeling completely unknown. You can be valued for what you do while feeling invisible for who you are. You can earn respect from everyone while having no one who actually sees the uncertain, struggling, imperfect person underneath the capable exterior. Capricorn doesn't consciously recognize this trade-off for years, sometimes decades. They're too busy achieving, proving, building, demonstrating worth. They mistake admiration for connection. They confuse being needed for being loved. They believe that if they're valuable enough, competent enough, successful enough, emotional intimacy will naturally follow. It doesn't. Because the very strategies they use to earn respect, emotional control, self-sufficiency, never showing weakness, maintaining composure, are the exact things that prevent intimacy. Intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires showing the messy parts. It requires admitting uncertainty. It requires needing someone not for what they can do for you, but simply for who they are. This is the core wound. Capricorn has learned to trade vulnerability for respect, and then wonders why their relationships feel hollow. They've mastered earning admiration while remaining fundamentally alone. They've built a life where they're valued but not known, needed but not seen, respected but not truly connected to. And this wound has a very specific trigger point. There are things you can say to Capricorn that immediately signal to them, you don't respect me. Not you don't love me, that they can handle. But you don't respect me as capable, competent together. That hits the deepest nerve. That confirms their worst fear. That even after all their effort to be respectable, someone still sees them as inadequate. The phrases that make Capricorn never reply again all have one thing in common. They undermine Capricorn's sense of being respected. They suggest that Capricorn isn't handling things well, that they need help they didn't ask for, that their judgment is questionable, that their competence is insufficient, that despite all their effort to be the capable one, someone still sees them as the problem. When you say these things, even with love, even with good intentions, Capricorn hears, I don't respect you as much as you needed me to. And that's the relationship-ending revelation. Not because they're petty or fragile, but because they've organized their entire life around earning respect as the pathway to security. If they can't earn your respect after everything they've done to demonstrate their worth, then there's no foundation for the relationship to continue. Let's examine the profound split between how Capricorn presents to the world and what's actually happening inside. This gap is where the pattern we're exploring lives and intensifies. Externally, Capricorn is the embodiment of having it together. They show up on time. They meet commitments. They handle responsibilities. They're the person in your life who seems to effortlessly manage complexity while everyone else is struggling. Watch them in professional settings, family dynamics, social situations. They're calm, measured, appropriate. They know what to say, how to act, when to step in, when to step back. In relationships, they present as the stable one, the partner who doesn't create drama, the friend who solves problems rather than adding to them, the family member who can be counted on during crisis. They take pride in this presentation. It confirms their value. It proves they've earned their place through competence rather than need. People describe Capricorn as solid, grounded, mature, wise beyond their years. They're often the person others come to for advice, support, practical help. Their external presence communicates, I don't need anything from you, but I'm here if you need me. This one-directional flow of support becomes their identity. But internally, there's an entirely different experience unfolding. Inside, Capricorn is running constant threat assessment. Every interaction is being analyzed through the filter of, does this person still respect me? Have I done something that made me look incompetent? Did I reveal too much uncertainty? Did I ask for help in a way that made me seem weak? Is my value to this person still clear? There's a hypervigilance around maintaining the image of capability. Any crack in that facade feels dangerous not because Capricorn is vain, but because they genuinely believe their value, and therefore their security in relationships depends on being seen as competent and together. If people see them struggling, uncertain, needing support, Capricorn fears they'll lose respect and, with it, their place in that person's life. This creates exhausting internal pressure. They're constantly editing what they share, monitoring how they come across, calculating whether expressing a need will cost them respect, weighing whether admitting struggle will change how they're perceived. Every conversation has this parallel track of what I'm saying and how this makes me look. Here's what makes this particularly painful. Capricorn often has the resources, capacity, and competence they're trying to project. They're genuinely capable, but the internal experience is filled with uncertainty, self-doubt, and the constant fear of being exposed as less together than they appear. The external performance isn't entirely false. It's just incomplete. It's the highlights reel, while the full footage sits unseen and unshared. The effort required to maintain this split is staggering. They're managing two realities simultaneously: the public persona of stability and the private experience of constant evaluation and adjustment. They're performing confidence while internally questioning. They're projecting certainty while internally uncertain. They're appearing emotionally regulated while internally exhausted from the regulation itself. And here's the cruelest part. Capricorn is often surrounded by people who would absolutely accept their uncertainty, their struggles, their needs. Partners who want to support them. Friends who would show up. Family who cares. But Capricorn has decided, usually unconsciously, that showing those parts would cost them something more valuable than connection: respect. So they keep performing capability while privately depleting. They keep being the strong one while silently wondering if anyone would love the uncertain version. They keep solving everyone else's problems while never revealing their own. They maintain the image while the person underneath that image becomes increasingly lonely. This is where the trigger we're exploring becomes devastating. When someone says something that suggests they see through the performance, that they've noticed Capricorn isn't as together as they appear, it feels like the worst possible outcome. Not because Capricorn wanted to deceive anyone, but because being seen as struggling means losing the respect they've worked so hard to maintain. The phrases that make Capricorn go silent aren't cruel. They're often caring. You seem stressed lately. Maybe you should talk to someone. I'm worried about you. You don't have to handle everything alone. To most people, these sound like support. To Capricorn, they sound like, I've noticed you're not as capable as you want me to think you are. And that perception, that their performance is failing, triggers complete withdrawal. Because if you can see they're struggling despite their best efforts to hide it, then the entire strategy has failed. And rather than increase vulnerability in response, rather than accept support, rather than admit the performance is exhausting, Capricorn's instinct is to create more distance, to reassert control by becoming unreachable, to protect what's left of their respectable image by simply disappearing from the conversation entirely. The external-internal split that Capricorn works so hard to maintain becomes unsustainable the moment someone notices the gap. And instead of bridging it, instead of allowing themselves to be seen more fully, their default response is to shut down communication completely. Better to be gone than to be seen as less than respectable. Now, let's map the specific behavioral cycles that emerge from this architecture. These are patterns Capricorn repeats across different relationships, different contexts, different life phases, patterns that feel frustratingly automatic even when they recognize them happening. The first pattern: deflection through competence. When someone expresses concern about Capricorn's well-being, their immediate response is to demonstrate capability. I'm fine, I've got it handled, look at everything I'm managing successfully. They respond to emotional care with evidence of functionality. Someone says, you seem overwhelmed, and Capricorn replies with a list of accomplishments to prove they're not. This deflection protects their image, but prevents connection. The person offering support feels dismissed. Capricorn feels misunderstood. They think they're reassuring the other person, not realizing they're actually rejecting intimacy. This cycle repeats until the other person stops offering emotional support entirely, which Capricorn then interprets as confirmation that they were right to be self-sufficient. The second pattern, interpreting care as criticism. When someone close to Capricorn suggests they need help, rest, support, or professional assistance, Capricorn hears this as an evaluation of their inadequacy. "You should take a break" translates to "you're not handling this well." "Maybe you should talk to someone" becomes "you're not capable of managing your own emotional life." This pattern creates impossible binds. People who care about Capricorn feel like they can't express concern without triggering withdrawal. Capricorn feels like people are constantly judging their capability. The more someone cares, the more they express that care, the more criticized Capricorn feels. So relationships become shallower over time, not deeper, because Capricorn only feels safe with people who never suggest they might need anything. The third pattern, testing through withdrawal. When Capricorn feels their competence has been questioned, they pull back to see if the relationship can survive without their constant demonstration of value. They stop initiating, stop solving problems, stop being the capable one. This is partially self-protection and partially a test. Do you value me for who I am or only for what I do? The tragedy is that most people fail this test because they interpret Capricorn's withdrawal as wanting space, so they give it. Capricorn then concludes, "See? They only cared about my usefulness. The moment I stopped performing, they disappeared." But the other person was just respecting boundaries they thought Capricorn was setting. Neither person realizes they're both operating from misunderstood intentions. The fourth pattern, accumulating unexpressed resentment. Capricorn says yes when they mean no. They take on responsibilities they don't want because saying no feels like admitting limitation. They handle things alone that they wish someone would help with, but they never ask because asking feels like weakness. Over time, resentment builds, not toward any specific person, but toward the situation they've created where they're over-functioning while feeling unsupported. This resentment has nowhere to go because Capricorn can't express it without admitting they need help, which would undermine their self-sufficient image. So it sits inside them, creating a low-grade bitterness that eventually colors all their relationships. They become increasingly difficult to reach emotionally while maintaining their external appearance of being fine. The fifth pattern, relationship endings through silence rather than conversation. When Capricorn decides a relationship isn't working, they don't typically have the breakup conversation. They don't explain what went wrong. They simply become progressively less available until the relationship fades into nothing. This protects them from having to articulate needs that weren't met, which would require admitting they had needs, and from the vulnerability of direct confrontation. For the other person, this is bewildering. The relationship seems fine, then suddenly Capricorn is distant, then they're essentially gone. Attempts to discuss what's happening are met with, "I'm just busy," or "everything's fine," until the other person eventually stops trying. Capricorn then frames this as the other person giving up, not recognizing that they orchestrated the ending through withdrawal. The sixth pattern, seeking relationships with people who admire them rather than know them. Capricorn gravitates toward relationships where they're in the position of being impressive, capable, together. They prefer relationships with a slight imbalance, where they're the more successful, more stable, more together person. This maintains their sense of safety. They can be respected without being vulnerable. But these relationships never satisfy. Capricorn ends up feeling admired but lonely, valued but unseen. They wonder why connection feels so hollow while not recognizing that they've specifically chosen relationships where depth is impossible because depth would require showing the less together parts of themselves. These patterns compound over time. Each repetition makes the next one more automatic. Each time Capricorn chooses withdrawal over vulnerability, that neural pathway gets stronger. Each time they interpret care as criticism, they reinforce the belief that emotional intimacy is dangerous. Each time they end a relationship silently rather than having the difficult conversation, they confirm that communication is riskier than disappearance. And underneath all these patterns is the same core wound. The belief that being seen as anything less than completely capable means losing respect, and losing respect means losing the relationship itself. Let's examine what happens when these patterns accumulate across years and decades. The compounding cost of living inside this architecture without addressing it. The first consequence is the gradual narrowing of relational capacity. When you spend years deflecting care, interpreting support as criticism, and withdrawing from people who express concern, you train yourself out of the ability to receive love in its most authentic forms. Over time, Capricorn becomes only able to accept appreciation that's tied to achievement, only comfortable with recognition that confirms capability, only able to receive care that doesn't acknowledge any actual need. This creates relationships that function but never nourish, partnerships that look stable but feel empty, friendships that exist but don't provide genuine support. Capricorn finds himself surrounded by people yet profoundly alone because they've systematically eliminated anyone who tried to see past the performance. The second consequence affects their relationship with rest and recovery. When your worth is tied to constant competence, taking breaks feels dangerous. Admitting exhaustion feels like weakness. Needing recovery time feels like failure. So Capricorn pushes through, powers through, handles things even when depleted. This creates chronic depletion that shows up in the body, persistent tension, sleep that doesn't restore, a tiredness that has nothing to do with how much they've done and everything to do with never allowing themselves to truly rest without guilt. They achieve impressive things while running on empty, wondering why success doesn't bring the satisfaction they expected. The third consequence is the erosion of self-trust. When you spend decades performing a version of yourself that's more together than you feel, you lose touch with your actual internal experience. Capricorn becomes disconnected from their own emotional reality because attending to it feels indulgent or weak. They override their body's signals. They ignore emotional exhaustion. They push past healthy limits. Over time, this creates a kind of internal estrangement. They don't know what they actually feel versus what they think they should feel. They can't distinguish between genuine capacity and compulsive overfunctioning. They've become so practiced at appearing fine that they've lost access to knowing when they're actually not fine. The fourth consequence shows up in how they experience important life transitions and decisions. Major choices, whether to change careers, end relationships, relocate, have children, make significant commitments, require accessing genuine desires and fears. But Capricorn has spent years editing those internal experiences to maintain their respectable image. So they make significant life decisions based on what seems logical, what appears appropriate, what maintains their image of having it together, rather than what they actually want or need. They can end up in impressive lives that feel fundamentally misaligned, achieving goals that meant something to the performed version of themselves, but leave the actual person underneath feeling empty. The fifth consequence is the accumulated grief of relationships that ended unnecessarily. Looking back, Capricorn can often identify moments when someone genuinely cared about them, tried to support them, offered real connection, and they withdrew because accepting that care would have required vulnerability. They ghost people who love them because those people noticed they were struggling. This grief has nowhere to go because acknowledging it would mean admitting that their defense mechanisms cost them something valuable. So it sits underneath everything, creating a baseline melancholy that Capricorn can't quite name. A sense that something is missing, but an inability to identify what or how to find it. The sixth consequence is the impact on younger people who look up to them. Capricorn often becomes the role model, the person others aspire to emulate. But what they're modeling is impressive achievement alongside emotional isolation, self-sufficiency without acknowledging its cost, success without genuine fulfillment. The next generation learns that this is what maturity looks like: being needed but never needing, being strong but never uncertain, being valuable but never vulnerable. Over the long term, what looks from the outside like a successful life can feel from the inside like a prison of their own construction. They've built everything they thought they wanted: respect, achievement, stability, admiration. and discovered that none of it satisfies the actual human need for connection, for being known, for mattering to someone not for what you accomplish, but for who you are underneath the accomplishments. And the most painful part? They can't articulate what's wrong. Their lives look good. They've done everything right. So the emptiness feels ungrateful. The loneliness feels like a personal failing. The exhaustion feels like evidence that they're still not doing enough. The pattern that was supposed to create security has actually created a sophisticated form of isolation that's harder to escape precisely because it looks so much like success. Here's the truth that sits at the absolute center of this entire pattern. The thing Capricorn has been running from while simultaneously running toward. You've been trying so hard to be respected that you've made yourself impossible to love. Let that settle. Really feel it. Not because you're unlovable. Not because you've done something wrong. But because love requires vulnerability, and you've built your entire identity around never being vulnerable. Love requires being seen in your uncertainty, and you've dedicated your life to appearing certain. Love requires needing someone, and you've organized your entire nervous system around the belief that needing people is dangerous. The phrases that make you go silent, you seem stressed, maybe you need help, I'm worried about you. You don't have to do this alone. These aren't attacks. They're invitations. Invitations to be human, to be incomplete, to be in process, to be worthy of care not because of what you've achieved, but simply because you exist and you matter to someone. But you can't accept those invitations because accepting them would mean acknowledging that the performance is a performance, that you're not always fine, that you do struggle, that you need support sometimes. And in your architecture, admitting any of that means losing respect. And losing respect means losing everything. So you choose being respected over being known, being admired over being loved, being impressive over being connected. And then you wonder why your life feels so lonely even though you're surrounded by people. Why your achievements feel hollow. Why success doesn't satisfy. Why you can accomplish everything on your list and still feel fundamentally empty. The answer is devastatingly simple. You can't be fulfilled by a life where you're only allowed to show the parts of yourself that are working, where vulnerability is forbidden, where uncertainty must be hidden, where needing someone is failure, where being human, actually fully human, is somehow not enough. Every time someone tries to see past your performance and you shut them out, you're confirming the pattern. You're choosing the familiar loneliness of being respected over the terrifying possibility of being loved. You're protecting yourself from the vulnerability of intimacy while simultaneously suffering from the absence of it. And here's what kills me about this pattern. You have so much to offer beyond your competence. You're intelligent, yes, but you're also insightful. You're capable, yes, but you're also sensitive. You're disciplined, yes, but you're also creative. You're strong, yes, but you're also scared sometimes. You're together, yes, but you're also uncertain. You're accomplished, yes, but you also long for things you haven't achieved. All of those second parts, the parts you hide, those are what make you actually lovable. Not admirably, not impressively, lovable. Worthy of connection not because of what you've proven, but because of who you are in your totality. But you'll never know that as long as you keep shutting down every conversation where someone tries to see the complete you. As long as you keep going silent when someone notices you're struggling. As long as you keep choosing to be gone rather than to be seen as anything less than perfect. The phrase that makes you never reply again isn't actually the problem. The problem is the architecture underneath that makes vulnerability feel like death. That makes being seen in your humanity feel more dangerous than being alone. That makes you choose silence over the risk of being known. You're not protecting yourself by withdrawing. You're confirming your deepest fear, that you're only valuable for what you do, not for who you are. And every time you disappear rather than stay present for the difficult conversation, you're making that fear more true. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave you if you're recognizing yourself in this pattern? Or if you love a Capricorn and finally understand why they keep disappearing. First, let's name something important. This pattern developed for legitimate reasons. The child, you were made brilliant adaptations to survive their environment. If showing vulnerability got you dismissed, ignored, or criticized, becoming self-sufficient wasn't optional. It was survival. If needing things made you a burden, learning to need nothing wasn't a character flaw. It was wisdom. That child deserves respect, not judgment. But survival strategies have expiration dates. What kept you safe at 7 is limiting you at 37. And you get to choose differently now. Not because the old way was wrong, but because you're ready for something more complete. Because survival isn't the same as living. The path forward isn't about becoming less capable or abandoning your competence. Those are genuine strengths. It's about adding vulnerability to your range without losing your capacity. Learning that you can be both together and uncertain. Both strong and sometimes struggling. Both competent and occasionally needing support. This means experimenting with staying present when someone expresses concern instead of immediately deflecting. Not transforming overnight, but trying one conversation where you don't prove you're fine. Where you let someone's care land instead of bouncing it back with evidence of capability. It means questioning the assumption that needing help diminishes respect. Testing whether the people who matter to you actually lose respect when you're human, or whether that's a story from childhood that's no longer accurate. You might discover that vulnerability increases intimacy without decreasing respect. That the people who truly value you see your humanity as adding to your worth, not subtracting from it. It means recognizing when you want to go silent and asking yourself, am I protecting myself from actual danger or from the discomfort of being seen? Not every instinct to withdraw needs to be overridden, but developing the capacity to distinguish between healthy boundaries and habitual defense is crucial. For those who love Capricorns, understanding this pattern doesn't mean accepting treatment that hurts you. You can have compassion for why they withdraw while also maintaining boundaries about what you will and won't tolerate. You can care about someone and still require them to show up for difficult conversations. Compassion doesn't mean staying in relationships where you're constantly walking on eggshells, afraid that expressing care will trigger permanent silence. The invitation here, for Capricorn and for everyone, is to recognize that being impressive is not the same as being connected. That admiration is not the same as intimacy. That respect without vulnerability is not actually the foundation of relationships that sustain you. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy of love. You don't need to have it all together to deserve support. You don't need to be endlessly capable to matter to someone. Those are old agreements you made with a world that didn't know how to see you fully. You get to renegotiate those agreements now. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about integration, including the parts you've exiled. Allowing the complete range of your humanity instead of just the respectable portions. Discovering that you're lovable not despite your needs, but as the complete, complex, occasionally uncertain person you actually are. The phrases that make you go silent are only devastating because you've given them so much power. Because you've decided that being seen as anything less than completely together is catastrophic. What if it's not? What if being human, messily, uncertainly, imperfectly human, is actually the prerequisite for the connection you're craving? Before you go, I have a question that I really want you to think about and answer honestly in the comments. What's the phrase someone said that made you shut down completely? The moment when you decided this person would never understand you, so there was no point in continuing the conversation? Or if you're on the other side of this, what did you say to a Capricorn that made them suddenly become unreachable? And you still don't understand why? Drop your answer in the comments. Not the sanitized version. The real one. The moment that still sits with you. This community is built on honesty, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to feel less alone in their pattern. And if this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not to call them out, not to prove a point, but because awareness is the first step toward choice, and someone in your life might be ready for that awareness right now. Make sure you're subscribed because next week we're exploring the other side of this dynamic. The signs that chase Capricorn even harder when they withdraw. The psychology of being attracted to emotional unavailability. Why some people interpret silence as a challenge rather than a boundary. It's the perfect companion to what we've covered today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the difficult work of examining these patterns instead of just repeating them. That takes real courage. I'll see you in the next video.